The town was small and dusty, with streets that seemed to stretch for miles under the sun. The houses were simple and worn, and the wind always carried the smell of dry earth and hay. The girl lived on the edge of the town in a small wooden house. With her family, she had grown up here, and every corner felt familiar. Yet her life felt heavy because she could not read. She had tried in school, but the letters and words danced on the pages as if mocking her every time she tried to read. She felt a knot in her stomach and a rush of shame. She kept it a secret from almost everyone, even from her family, because she did not want them to think less of her. She helped as much as she could at home and outside, yet she always felt a little behind. As if the world was moving faster than she could catch up, she spent her days helping her mother with chores and watching over her younger siblings. She knew every crack in the wooden floor, every piece of worn furniture, and every creak in the house. She loved her family and wanted to do everything to help, but she also felt trapped. She wanted to learn to read, but she did not know how to begin. She would sometimes peek at the letters in books or newspapers and try to guess the sounds she tried to copy what she saw, but it never seemed right. She would hide the books when anyone came near and pretend to be busy with something else. She felt lonely in her struggle, but she had learned to carry it silently. One morning, the girl was at the small market at the edge of town. She had gone to get some flour for her mother. The market was lively with people talking and trading. She noticed a man on horseback riding slowly along the street. He was a cowboy with a wide hat and worn boots. The horse was strong and calm. He seemed to notice everything around him, and yet he had a quiet presence that made people feel at ease. He stopped near the girl and smiled at the children running around. The girl felt a strange curiosity about him. He looked as if he carried stories of open plains and long journeys. She could not explain why, but she felt drawn to him. The girl was carrying a letter her mother had received from a relative. She had been asked to read it aloud, but her heart raced as she looked at the words. She tried to sound them out slowly, but they tumbled into each other. She stumbled over letters and finally gave up. She felt embarrassed and wished she could disappear. She hid the letter behind her back and looked down. The cowboy happened to see the struggle and noticed the tension in her small frame. He did not say anything at first. He waited, and then softly asked if she needed help. The girl shook her head quickly. She did not want to be seen as incapable. She could not explain why, but she felt a strange sense of trust in his calm voice. The cowboy stayed nearby for a few minutes watching her. She noticed him looking at her with gentle curiosity, and it made her heart beat faster. She felt a strange mix of fear and hope, as if someone could see inside her struggle without judging her. She took a deep breath and tried to read again. This time he said softly, "You can do it if you take it slowly." She hesitated, but then tried one word at a time. She stumbled at first, but then managed to sound out a few words correctly. The cowboy nodded encouragingly and smiled. He did not rush her. He let her take her time. She felt relief mixed with a little pride after that day. The cowboy began to appear more often in town. He would stop to talk to people, and sometimes he would find the girl helping at the market or running errands. She was always nervous when he came near, but also curious. He never made her feel foolish. He asked gentle questions and listened to her answers. He seemed to notice the smallest efforts she made and praised them. She had never felt this kind of attention before. It was not pity or judgment. It was simple kindness and patience. She began to look forward to his presence as something that could bring a little light into her otherwise heavy days. The girl started to learn from the cowboy in small ways. She would carry letters or read simple signs aloud while he was nearby. He would correct her gently and repeat words slowly. She began to feel that maybe she could learn. He never forced her. He let her make mistakes and celebrate small successes. She began to practice at home. When she thought no one was watching, she would sound out words and copy letters in the dirt. She felt a quiet excitement in these secret moments. She knew it would not be easy, but for the first time she felt a spark of hope. The cowboy also shared stories with her about life on the open plains, about the animals he cared for and the long rides he spoke about simple truths about work and patience and the importance of believing in oneself. He did not talk down to her or pretend to know everything. He spoke as if he was inviting her to see the world differently and maybe see herself differently too. She listened eagerly and sometimes asked questions. She found that she could ask questions without fear of being mocked. He became a teacher not in a classroom, but in life and language. At the same time, one afternoon, he found her. Sitting under a large tree near the edge of town, she was tracing letters in the dirt and mumbling words. She looked frustrated and ready to give up. He sat beside her without saying a word at first and watched. She kept trying and sighing. He waited until she paused and then said softly, "Learning is hard, but every step you take matters." She looked at him unsure. She had never had anyone say something like that to her before. She felt a little courage stir inside. He suggested a simple exercise. Just a few words at a time. She tried again, slowly sounding out letters carefully. He corrected gently, and soon she read a short sentence correctly. She smiled shyly inside. She could not believe it had worked. Days turned into weeks. And the girl's confidence grew slowly. She still struggled at times, but the moments of success became more frequent. The cowboy always noticed and celebrated even the smallest victories. I taught her in ways that made sense to her, not by forcing rules, but by using examples she could relate to. He encouraged her to keep a journal of letters she copied. He also encouraged her to speak about her day in simple sentences. She practiced speaking and reading at the same time and began to feel the power of language. She began to see that learning was not just about letters, it was about understanding and expressing herself. Town began to notice the change in her too. She seemed quieter at first, but now there was a sense of purpose in her movements. People saw her carrying letters confidently and helping others. She still did not tell anyone about her early struggles, but she no longer felt trapped by them. The cowboy remained her steady guide and friend. He never pressured her, he never judged. He only believed in her, and that belief became a force she could rely on. One evening after a long day at the market, he found her sitting on a small bench outside her house. She was tired but happy. She showed him a note she had copied from a book. He read it carefully and nodded approvingly. He told her she had done well and that she should be proud. She felt a warmth in her chest that she had not known before. She realized that learning to read was not just about letters on a page. It was about feeling capable. It was about trust and patience and the quiet presence of someone who believed in her. The cowboy made a promise to her one day. He said that if she would trust him, he would help her open doors she'd never imagined possible. She did not understand fully what he meant, but she nodded. She wanted to believe. She wanted to take the step. She felt that maybe her life could be different. She could feel the spark of something new. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time she was not afraid to try. From that day on, their bond grew stronger. She practiced reading with him and even tried writing simple words for her family. He encouraged her to see each success as a step forward, not as the end. He reminded her that mistakes were part of learning. She felt a quiet joy in these small achievements. She began to dream a little. She imagined herself reading letters from faraway places and writing her own stories. She imagined helping others who struggled. As she had, the cowboy never gave her easy answers. He always guided her to find solutions on her own. He believed in her even when she doubted herself. He showed her that learning was not about speed, but about steady effort. He showed her that a single promise kept with patience and care could change the path of a life. By the end of the first season of their lessons, the girl had made remarkable progress. She could read short letters aloud. She could write simple sentences. She could help her family with notes and messages. She still had a long way to go, but she felt empowered. She realized that learning was not just a skill. It was a way to see the world differently. It was a way to see herself differently. The cowboy remained by her side as a guide, a friend, and a steady presence. He did not demand thanks or recognition. He only wanted to see her succeed. He understood that the real reward was the growth she experienced. She felt grateful in ways she could not yet express. She was beginning to see that life was not about what she could not do, but about what she could achieve with support and belief in. Those early days of their journey together, the girl learned more than reading. She learned patience. She learned resilience. She learned the quiet power of trust. She discovered that a simple act of kindness could ignite courage. She realized that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She began to see that the world had more possibilities than she had thought possible. And so the days passed slowly with lessons and small successes. The town went about its life, but something had changed for the girl. She had a new light inside her, a quiet strength that came from learning and from being believed in she had met. A cowboy who saw her potential and made a promise she could now imagine a future she had never dared to dream. She felt the first stirrings of hope and determination. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time she felt ready. To walk it, the girl woke early the next morning and felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had learned a little each day. But today she felt that something important could happen. She walked carefully to the edge of town where the cowboy usually stopped. His horse was already grazing nearby. He was sitting on a wooden fence watching the sun rise. She waved quietly, and he nodded as if he had been expecting her. She felt a warmth in her chest. She had not felt this kind of attention before, and it made her nervous. In a good way, the cowboy noticed how tense she was and said softly, "We can start slow today." She nodded and took a deep breath. She carried a small notebook she had been keeping at home. She opened it carefully and showed him the letter she had copied. The words were simple but neat. She had been practicing each night when everyone else was asleep. He looked at her work and smiled quietly. It was not a wide smile, but there was a spark in his eyes. He said, "You are improving more than you think." She felt a little pride rise inside her. She had never imagined that someone could notice her effort and care so much. They started with simple sentences. The cowboy would write a word in the dirt, and she would try to read it. She stumbled at first, but he was patient. He would repeat the word slowly and then ask her to say it again. She would sound it out carefully and sometimes make mistakes, but he never corrected her harshly. He only guided her gently. He wanted her to feel that mistakes were part of learning and that each attempt mattered. She began to understand that learning was not about getting everything right at once, but about trying again and again. At her. While he asked her to try a longer sentence, he hesitated for a moment, as if thinking carefully, and then wrote 3 short sentences in the dirt. She looked at them and felt a little fear. She worried that she might not be able to do it, but she remembered how he had told her that she could. Try one step at a time. She took a deep breath and began to sound out the first sentence. Slowly the words started to make sense to her. She was able to read the whole sentence correctly. The cowboy nodded and said, "Well done." She felt a small rush of joy inside. She could not stop herself from smiling. She had never imagined that she could read something so long by herself. Cowboy then told her a story while she listened carefully. He spoke about his childhood on the plains, about the animals he had cared for. In the long days of riding, he did not speak in complicated words. He used simple words that painted pictures in her mind. She imagined herself riding along the open plains, feeling the wind and watching the sun set behind the hills. She realized that she could picture things in her mind and put them into words. He encouraged her to describe what she saw and felt. She tried slowly and hesitantly at first, but soon she was forming sentences that made sense. He listened carefully and nodded encouragingly. After the story, he asked her to write a few sentences about her day. She picked up a stick and started writing in the dirt. She wrote slowly and carefully, trying to remember the letters she had practiced. She felt frustrated at times when she forgot a letter or mixed them up. He leaned closer and gently reminded her. She corrected her mistakes and tried again. After a while, she read what she had written aloud, and the words made sense. She felt a small thrill. Inside, her thoughts were now on the page. She had transformed her feelings into words, and someone had heard them and understood them. Days passed in this way. Slowly and steadily, the girl practiced reading and writing. She still stumbled over words and sometimes felt discouraged, but the cowboy was always there guiding her. He reminded her that every small step mattered and that the journey was more important than speed. She began to trust him more and more. She could ask questions, and he would answer without judgment. She realized that learning with someone who believed in her was very different from trying alone. She felt a growing confidence that was quiet but strong. One afternoon, the cowboy suggested a new exercise. He asked her to read a letter aloud for him that she had copied from a small book. She felt nervous. She worried about making mistakes in front of him. She took a deep breath and began slowly. She sounded out the words and managed to complete the letter without stopping. He nodded and said that she had done very well. She felt a mixture of relief and pride. She realized that she could read letters, and that reading was no longer something that scared her completely. She had made progress, and she could feel Yet in her heart the cowboy noticed the change in her. He said that he had a promise for her if she wanted it. She looked at him curiously. He said that if she trusted him, he could help her learn more than she could imagine, and open doors she never had thought possible. She did not fully understand what he meant, but she wanted to believe. She nodded slowly. She felt a sense of hope she had not felt before. She wanted to take that step, even though she was not sure what it would lead to. From that day, the lessons became more focused. He encouraged her to read simple stories and then write what she understood.
Eyes.
She practiced every day, and soon she could read more than a few sentences at a time.
I'd.
She could write small notes for her family. She began to feel that her secret weakness was slowly turning into strength. She felt proud, but also humble. She understood that progress required patience, effort, and trust. She had learned more than letters. She had learned that someone could believe in her, even when she doubted herself. The cowboy continued to share stories about the plains, about animals, about people he had met, and the hard work he had done. He told stories not just for entertainment, but to teach her new words and ideas. She listened carefully and tried to describe what she imagined. He corrected her gently and praised her efforts. She began to feel that language was not just a tool, but a way to express herself and connect with others. She began to dream of reading more books and understanding the world beyond the town. One day she decided to try reading loud in front of a small group of children from the town. She was nervous, but wanted to share what she had learned. The cowboy encouraged her quietly. She took a deep breath and began slowly. Her words formed sentences, and the children listened. She felt a sense of pride and joy. She realized that learning to read was not just for herself, but could be a gift for others. She felt a quiet happiness knowing that she could now help others understand the words she had once struggled with. The cowboy reminded her that learning was a journey. He told her that every step she took mattered more than the mistakes. She began to understand that patience and perseverance were more important than speed. She started to enjoy reading. She could read letters, notes, signs, and short stories. She felt a sense of freedom in words. She could understand things she had only guessed at before. She felt that she had discovered a new part of herself. Her family began to notice the change too. She could now help with letters and messages. She could explain simple things she had learned. She still kept some of her early struggles secret, but she no longer felt ashamed. She felt empowered. She had grown quietly and steadily. She realized that learning with someone patient and kind had changed her life. She could now see possibilities she had never imagined. The cowboy made sure she understood that her journey was just beginning. He encouraged her to dream bigger. He suggested small goals first, and then larger ones. She started to imagine a future where she could read letters from faraway relatives, write her own notes, and even tell her own stories. She felt excitement at the thought. She began to understand that learning could be a key to new opportunities. She felt a sense of purpose growing inside her. Days turned into weeks, and the girl's confidence grew. The cowboy continued to guide her. He helped her practice and praised her efforts. She began to feel that she could overcome challenges. She understood that learning was not about being perfect, but about trying again and again. She felt a quiet strength building inside her. Fear of reading slowly faded. She felt ready to face new challenges. She realized that the promise the cowboy had made was not just about reading. It was about belief, support, and the courage to dream. The girl started to see that small steps could lead to big changes. She practiced reading and writing every day. She tried to read signs, letters, and simple books. She felt joy when she could understand something that had once been impossible. She realized that learning could be fun and rewarding. She could now see the world differently. She understood that her struggle had not been a weakness, but a path to growth. She felt gratitude for the cowboy who had seen her potential and believed in her. The cowboy continued to encourage her. He never demanded results. He only guided her. He reminded her that progress mattered more than perfection. She began to enjoy learning. She could read aloud with confidence. She could write small notes. She began to imagine helping others in the town who struggled as she had. She felt a sense of responsibility and pride. She realized that learning was not just a personal journey, but a way to connect and give to others. The girl had changed quietly, but profoundly. She had grown in confidence and skill. She had learned patience, perseverance, and hope. She had discovered the joy of reading and writing. She had discovered that someone's belief in her could change. Her life, she had met a cowboy who had kept his promise and guided her. She felt ready to take the next step in her journey. She understood that the road ahead would have challenges, but she felt stronger and more capable than ever before she began. To look forward to each lesson, she felt excitement and curiosity. She wanted to learn more. She wanted to grow, realized that her life could be different than she had imagined. She felt hope in her heart and a quiet courage. She knew that the promise the cowboy had made would continue to guide her. She felt ready to trust and take steps toward the future. She had never dared to imagine. The girl woke early again and felt a quiet nervousness. She had been learning steadily, but she knew that the next steps would be harder. She carried her notebook and a small pencil and walked slowly toward the edge of town, where the cowboy waited. His horse was already tethered to a post, and he was leaning against the fence, watching the morning light touch the hills. She waved softly and he nodded. She felt a small surge of courage. She had come far, but the next challenge felt bigger than anything she had done before. The cowboy smiled gently and asked if she was ready. She nodded, even though her stomach was tight. She opened her notebook and showed him the words she had practiced. The letters were neater now and the sentences longer. He looked carefully and said that she had made remarkable progress. She felt a little pride, but also fear, because she knew the next exercise would be more difficult. He asked her to read a short story aloud. He had chosen a simple one, but it still had words she had never tried before. She took a deep breath and began. The first sentences were slow and careful. She sounded out each word and paused to think. She stumbled several times, but the cowboy encouraged her quietly. He reminded her that mistakes were part of learning. She corrected herself and continued slowly. The words began to flow. She realized that she could understand the story as she read. She felt a thrill. She could see the meaning behind the letters. She could imagine the characters and the places. The story was no longer just words on a page. It was a little world she could enter and explore. After she finished, he asked her questions about the story. She hesitated at first, but then answered slowly at first, and then more confidently. She described the characters, their actions, and the way the story made her feel. The cowboy nodded and listened carefully. He told her that understanding the story was just as important as reading the words. He explained that reading was not just about letters, it was about ideas, feelings, and imagination. She felt a new sense of purpose. She realized that reading could open doors to many worlds she had never known. The next few days were filled with similar exercises. He encouraged her to read more complex sentences and try to write her own small stories. She sometimes struggled and sometimes succeeded. She felt frustrated when she made mistakes, but the cowboy reminded her to be patient. He said that growth was like a river that flowed slowly, but steadily. She began to see her progress not as a series of jumps, but as a gradual rise. She felt satisfaction in the small victories. She began to trust the process, and herself. One afternoon, the cowboy asked her to help with a small task. He handed her a note from a neighbor that needed to be delivered. She read it carefully and then wrote a short reply. She felt a little nervous because she did not want to make a mistake. He watched quietly and then checked her work. She had written correctly and clearly. He praised her. She felt a warm pride. She realized that her learning was becoming practical. She could now do things she had once thought impossible. The cowboy also shared more stories with her about his life. He spoke of long rides across the plains, of helping animals, and of people he had met along the way. He did not speak in complicated words. He used simple phrases that painted pictures in her mind. She imagined herself riding with him, feeling the wind and seeing the sun set behind the hills. He asked her to describe what she saw in her mind. She tried carefully and slowly at first, but soon she could speak with more confidence. He listened and corrected gently. She began to understand that imagination and language were closely connected. The girl also began to write more. She copied letters and stories in her notebook. She tried to describe her day in sentences. She sometimes made mistakes, but she kept trying. The cowboy reminded her that effort was more important than perfection. He said that every small step mattered. She began to see that learning was not a race. It was a journey that required patience, courage, and trust. She felt a quiet satisfaction in her growing skills. She began to dream about reading books she had never been able to touch. One day, the cowboy suggested that she read aloud for a small group of children in the town. She felt nervous and worried. She had never read in front of anyone but him. She worried that she would stumble or be laughed at. He encouraged her quietly. She took a deep breath and began slowly at first, and then with more confidence. The children listened and smiled. She felt a quiet joy. She realized that she could share what she had learned. She had a new skill that could help not only herself but others. She felt proud and responsible. The days turned into weeks, and the girl's reading grew stronger. She could now read longer stories and write her own sentences. She sometimes stumbled, but she could correct herself. She began to enjoy the process. She could imagine stories and describe them. She could now read letters and notes for her family. She felt that her world had opened. She began to see that learning was more than letters. It was understanding and expression. She felt a quiet confidence that grew with every breath. The cowboy continued to guide her. He never forced her. He only encouraged and corrected. He reminded her to be patient with herself and to keep trying. She began to see that learning required effort and belief. She realized that he had not just taught her to read, he had taught her to believe in herself. She felt grateful for his guidance. She understood that his promise had given her hope. She began to see that the promise was more than words. It was trust, support, and care. One evening they sat by the river and watched the sun go down. He asked her to write a small letter about her day. She picked up her pencil and wrote slowly. She tried to remember the words she had learned. She stumbled and corrected herself. He watched quietly and smiled. She finished the letter and read it aloud. It made sense. She felt a sense of achievement. She realized that she could now express herself in writing. She had a new tool to communicate. She felt powerful in a quiet way. The cowboy reminded her. That growth was a journey, he said. That learning was not about being perfect, but about continuing to try. She began to understand that patience was as important as skill. She started to enjoy her lessons. She could read and write. She could understand stories and express her thoughts. She began to see the world differently. She realized that knowledge could give her freedom. She could now imagine places and people she had never seen. She felt a new sense of possibility. The girl also started to notice changes in herself. She felt more confident. She spoke more clearly and listened more carefully. She helped her family with letters and notes. She felt proud that she could now do what had once seemed impossible. She understood that learning was not just a skill, it was a way to connect with others. She felt a growing sense of responsibility. She realized that she could help people who struggled like she had. She felt a quiet satisfaction in her new abilities. The cowboy continued to share simple stories and lessons. He encouraged her to write and read daily. He reminded her that every small effort mattered. She began to enjoy the process of learning. She could read signs, letters, and simple books. She could write sentences in short stories. She began to dream about learning more. She felt hope in her heart. She understood that the promise he had made was real. She began to trust that her life could be different. She felt ready to continue on the path of growth. Weeks passed, and the girl's confidence grew. She could now read aloud smoothly. She could write her own sentences. She sometimes made mistakes, but she learned from them. She began to enjoy reading. She could now imagine herself in stories and describe what she imagined. She felt empowered. She realized that learning was giving her a new way to see the world. She understood that the cowboy's promise had opened a door. She felt a quiet joy and determination. She knew she had taken the first important steps toward a new life. One morning, he suggested that she tried reading a longer story by herself. She felt nervous, but agreed. She opened the book and began slowly at first, and then with growing confidence. She read carefully, sounding out the words. She stumbled a few times but corrected herself. She could understand the story. She could describe the characters and the events. She realized that she was reading and thinking at the same time. She felt proud. She had achieved something she had never imagined. The cowboy smiled quietly. He reminded her that the journey was just beginning. He said that learning would continue and that she should keep practicing. She felt a sense of excitement. She understood that she could now learn new things. She felt that her world had expanded. She began to see possibilities she had never known. She felt a quiet strength. She had learned patience and perseverance. She had learned to trust herself and the support of someone who believed in her. The girl began to look forward to each day. She practiced reading and writing. She shared what she learned with her family. She could now read letters and notes. She began to dream about the future. She felt hope and courage. She understood that learning was not just about letters. It was about seeing the world differently and finding her own voice. She felt gratitude for the cowboy who had guided her. She felt ready to take the next steps. She knew that her journey of growth was only beginning. Girl woke up early with a quiet sense of excitement. She felt that her learning had reached a new stage, and that each day now held something important. She carried her notebook and pencil and walked toward the edge of town where the cowboy was. Waiting, the horse was already tethered to a post, and he leaned casually against the fence, watching the first light touch the hills. She waved softly, and he nodded. She felt a warm courage inside. She had come far, but she knew the next steps would test her in new ways. The cowboy greeted her quietly and asked how she had been practicing. She showed him the letters and sentences she had written in her notebook. He looked carefully and nodded approvingly. He said that she had improved remarkably. She felt pride, but also a nervous flutter. She knew that he had chosen a new exercise for her and that it would be harder than before. He explained that she would now try reading a longer story and then describe it in her own words. She took a deep breath and opened the book slowly. The first sentences were challenging. She sounded out each word slowly and carefully. She stumbled a few times but remembered what the cowboy had told her about mistakes and learning. She corrected herself and continued. She began to understand the story. As she read, the characters came alive in her mind. She could see the scenes and imagine the actions. She felt a thrill. She was entering a world that had once seemed unreachable. She realized that reading was more than letters. It was a way to explore and experience. She felt a quiet joy and determination to continue. After she finished reading, he asked her to describe the story aloud. She hesitated, but then slowly began to tell the plot. She spoke carefully at first, and then with more confidence. She described the characters, the events, and her feelings about what had happened. The cowboy listened attentively. He reminded her that understanding and expressing her thoughts were as important as reading the words. He explained that language was not just letters, it was a tool to share ideas, to connect to others. She felt a new sense of purpose. She realized that her skills could help her communicate and connect. The next few days were filled with similar exercises. He encouraged her to read more complex sentences and try writing her own short stories. She sometimes struggled, but she kept trying. She felt frustrated when she made mistakes, but the cowboy reminded her to be patient. He said that learning was like a river flowing steadily. She began to understand that progress was gradual and that each step mattered. She began to enjoy the small victories. She felt proud of the efforts she was making. She was slowly gaining confidence in herself and her abilities. One afternoon, he asked her to write a letter for a neighbor. She read the original note carefully and then wrote a reply. She felt nervous, but tried her best. She made a few mistakes and corrected them. She read her letter aloud to the cowboy, and he nodded. He praised her for her careful work. She felt proud. She realized that reading and writing were no longer just exercises. They were tools she could use in her life. She could now help her family and community. She felt a quiet satisfaction and a sense of responsibility. The cowboy continued to tell stories about his life. He spoke of long rides across the plains, about the animals cared for, and the people he had met. He used simple words that painted pictures. In her mind, she imagined herself riding alongside him, feeling the wind and watching the sun set behind the hills. He asked her to describe what she imagined. She tried slowly at first, but then spoke with more confidence. He listened carefully and corrected gently. She began to understand that imagination and language worked together. She could picture a scene and then describe it in words. She felt a quiet pride in this new ability. The girl also began to write more. She copied stories and letters into her notebook. She wrote about her day in sentences. She made mistakes, but she kept trying. She began to enjoy the process. She felt a quiet sense of growth. She realized that learning required patience, effort, and belief. She began to trust herself more. She could see her progress, and it motivated her. She felt that she could now face challenges with courage. She was discovering a new strength inside her. One day, the cowboy suggested that she read aloud for a small group of children. In the town, she felt nervous. She had never read in front of anyone but him. He encouraged her quietly. She took a deep breath and began slowly at first, and then with growing confidence. The children listened carefully. She felt a quiet joy. She realized that she could share her knowledge with others. She felt proud that her learning could help someone else. She began to understand that her skills were not just for herself, but for her community. She felt a sense of purpose growing inside her days. turned into weeks, and the girl's reading and writing improved steadily. She could now read longer stories and write her own sentences. She sometimes stumbled, but she could correct herself. She began to enjoy learning. She could imagine stories and describe them. She could read letters and notes. She felt that her world had grown. She understood that learning was more than letters. It was understanding ideas, expressing thoughts, and connecting with others. She felt a quiet confidence that grew each day. The cowboy continued to guide her. He did not push. He only encouraged. He reminded her to be patient with herself and to keep practicing. She began to enjoy her lessons. She could read signs, letters, and short books. She could write sentences. In short stories, she began to dream about learning more. She felt hope and courage. She understood that the promise he had made was real. She began to trust that her life could change. She felt ready to continue on her journey. Weeks passed, and the girl's confidence grew. She could now read aloud smoothly. She could write her own sentences. She still made mistakes, but she learned from them. She enjoyed reading. She could imagine herself in stories. She could describe what she imagined she felt. Empowered, she realized that learning had given her a new way to see the world. She understood that the cowboy's promise had opened a door. She felt a quiet joy and determination she knew she had taken important steps toward a new life. One morning, he suggested that she try reading a story completely by herself. She felt nervous but agreed. She opened the book and began slowly at first, and then with growing confidence, she read carefully. She stumbled a few times but corrected herself. She understood the story. She could describe the characters and events. She realized that she could read and think at the same time. She felt proud. She had achieved something she had never imagined. She understood that this was just the beginning of many new possibilities. Cowboy smiled quietly. He reminded her that learning was a journey. He said that each step she took mattered more than mistakes. She began to understand that patience and effort were as important as skills. She enjoyed reading. She could now write sentences. She could understand stories. She could express herself. She felt that her world had expanded. She could see possibilities she had never imagined. She felt a quiet strength. She had learned to trust herself and the support of someone who believed in her. The girl began to look forward to each day. She practiced reading and writing. She shared what she learned with her family. She could read letters and notes. She began to dream. She felt hope and courage. She understood that learning was not just letters. It was a way to see the world differently. She felt gratitude for the cowboy who had guided her. She felt ready to take the next steps. She knew that her journey was only beginning. She felt empowered and excited to continue. Her path toward growth, her progress, became visible to others. She helped her family with reading and writing. She could now explain things that had once been confusing. She felt a quiet pride in herself. She began to see that learning was not just a personal skill, it was a way to help and connect. She understood that her journey was giving her confidence and responsibility. She felt ready to take on new challenges. She was discovering that the promise the cowboy had made was becoming real. She felt a sense of hope and determination that grew every day. The girl woke early and felt a quiet excitement. She had come so far in her journey of learning. She carried her notebook and pencil and walked toward the edge of town where the cowboy was waiting. The horse was grazing nearby. He was leaning against the fence, watching the first light of the day touch the hills. She waved softly, and he nodded. She felt a warmth inside. She had grown in ways she had never imagined, and she felt ready for what lay ahead. The cowboy greeted her quietly and asked how she had been practicing. She opened her notebook and showed him the letters, sentences, and stories she had written over the past weeks. He looked carefully and nodded approvingly. He said that her progress had been remarkable. She felt a quiet pride. She realized that the promise he had made long ago was now becoming real. He told her that today they would do something different. She would not only read and write, but also share her learning with others. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He led her to a small gathering in the town. She had never spoken or read aloud in front of so many people. She felt her heart beat faster. She looked at the faces of the children and adults who were watching. Her hands trembled slightly, but she remembered his words about patience, effort, and belief. She took a deep breath and began to read aloud, slowly at first, and then with more confidence. She sounded out each word carefully and continued through the sentences. She stumbled a few times, but corrected herself. She realized that she was capable of more than she had ever believed. The audience listened quietly. Some smiled encouragingly. Others watched with curiosity. She felt a quiet joy as she continued. She began to describe what the story meant to her. She explained the characters and events in her own words. She spoke slowly and carefully, but with growing confidence. She could see that the people were listening. She felt a sense of connection. She realized that her learning was now not just for herself, but for others. She could share her knowledge. She could inspire confidence. She could show that anyone could learn with patience and guidance. After she finished reading, she looked at the cowboy. He nodded and smiled. He reminded her that this moment was proof of her growth. She felt a surge of pride and relief. She realized that she had come so far from the girl who once hid letters from fear and shame. She had learned to read and write. She had learned patience, perseverance, and trust. She had discovered a quiet strength inside herself. She understood that learning was not just about letters. It was about courage, effort, and connection. The next days were filled with new exercises. She continued to read and write. She practiced longer stories and wrote her own letters. She described events from her day. She shared her writings with the cowboy, who guided her gently. She sometimes made mistakes, but he reminded her that effort was more important than perfection. She began to enjoy learning more than ever. She could see the progress she had made, and it inspired her to continue. She felt that her world had opened and that she could reach further than she had ever imagined. She also began to help others. She assisted younger children with letters. She helped neighbors read notes and signs. She felt proud of being able to use her learning to make life easier for others. She realized that the promise the cowboy had made was now becoming a gift she could give to the community. She understood that her growth was not just personal, but could touch the lives of others. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her efforts mattered beyond herself. Cowboy continued to guide her. He shared simple stories about life on the plains and the people he had met. He asked her to imagine the scenes and describe them in words. She spoke carefully at first, and then with more confidence she could picture the events and explain them. She felt a sense of empowerment. She understood that language and imagination were connected. She could now express herself clearly. She could share ideas and feelings. She could communicate with others in ways she had never imagined. One afternoon he asked her to write a long letter to someone far away. She felt nervous, but excited. She picked up her pencil and wrote slowly. She checked each word and corrected mistakes. She read the letter aloud. When she was done, the cowboy listened quietly and nodded approvingly. She felt a sense of achievement. She realized that she could now communicate with people she had never met. She had transformed from a girl who could not read into someone who could share thoughts, ideas, and stories. She felt a quiet strength and pride. Days turned into weeks, and the girl's confidence grew steadily. She could read longer stories. She could write letters and short stories. She could describe events and ideas. She sometimes stumbled, but she learned from mistakes. She began to enjoy learning. She could imagine worlds and describe them. She could read letters and notes. She felt that her life had changed. She understood that learning had opened doors. She had a new skill and a new way to see the world. She felt empowered and ready for more challenges. The cowboy reminded her that learning was a journey. He said that every step mattered and that patience, effort, and trust were more important than speed. She began to understand that growth was gradual. She enjoyed practicing and learning. She could now see the results of her efforts. She could help others. She could communicate. She could imagine and describe. She felt hope, courage, and pride. She realized that the promise he had made was now fully alive. She felt a sense of gratitude for his guidance and belief. One morning, he suggested a special task. She would write a story from her own imagination and read it to the town. She felt a little nervous but excited. She picked up her pencil and thought carefully. She wrote slowly, describing characters, places, and events. She made small mistakes, but corrected them. She read the story aloud to the cowboy. He listened attentively and smiled. She felt encouraged. She realized that she could create something entirely her own. She could express thoughts and ideas. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She understood that she had grown far beyond what she had imagined. When the day came to read her story to the town, she felt nervous again. Her heart beat quickly. She saw the children and adults waiting. She took a deep breath and began slowly at first, and then with growing confidence, she read the sentences clearly. She described the characters and events. She could see that the people were listening. She felt a quiet joy. She realized that her learning was now part of her life, and the lives of others she could inspire and connect. She could show that anyone could achieve growth with patience and belief. After the reading, she looked at the cowboy. He nodded quietly. She felt a wave of gratitude. She realized that the promise he had made years ago had changed her life. She had learned to read and write. She had gained confidence, courage, and strength. She could now express herself. She could share knowledge. She could dream. She understood that a single promise kept with patience and care could change a life forever. She felt a quiet happiness in her heart. The girl continued to practice reading and writing. She helped others. She shared her stories. She wrote letters to distant friends and relatives. She could read books and notes. She had gained a new skill and a new way to see the world. She felt confident and capable. She realized that learning was not just for herself, it was a way to connect with others and make life better. She felt a quiet sense of pride and accomplishment. She understood that her journey was proof that patience, effort, and belief could transform a life. Cowboy remained a steady presence. He guided her gently. He encouraged her. He reminded her to be patient and persistent. She understood that growth required effort. She enjoyed learning. She felt proud she could read and write. She could share and connect. She could imagine and describe. She felt empowered. She had transformed from a girl who could not read to someone who could change her life and the lives of others. She felt hope, joy, and determination. Years passed and the girl continued to grow. She learned more and more. She read books and wrote letters. She helped her family and community. She shared her knowledge and inspired others. She remembered the cowboy who had made a simple promise and kept it. She realized that his belief in her had made all the difference. She felt grateful. She understood that the promise was more than words. It was trust, care, and guidance. It had changed her life and given her a future she could never have imagined. Town began to tell her story. She had become a quiet legend of hope and perseverance. People admired her growth and courage. She had shown that learning could transform a life. She had shown that patience, effort, and belief could open doors. She felt proud. She knew that her journey had started with a promise. She had kept learning and growing. She had shared knowledge. She had inspired others. She had found confidence, courage, and hope. She had changed her life forever, and so her story became part of the town. She had grown from a girl who could not read to a woman who could read, write, and inspire. She continued to learn. She continued to help. She continued to share. Her life had been transformed by a simple promise and by her own courage and effort. She had discovered the power of belief, patience, and determination. She felt gratitude, hope, and joy. She knew that learning had given her a new world and a new way to live. She felt proud and ready for whatever came next.